Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here today. This is the joint oversight hearing between the Senate Human Services Committee and the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee number 3 on Health and Human Services. A couple of housekeeping notes. We do have a few members that are en route with managed care organization tax deal on the table. There is a current budget meeting even as we speak. Our co-chair, Senator Mitchell, will be here shortly, along with Senator Hancock, who is also on the Budget Committee. So they will be here momentarily, and apologize in advance, but they are doing the good business in regards to getting that MCO deal done, which will be wonderful for DD. And honored to be able to be joined here with Assemblymember Dodd. And what I'd like to be able to do today is just open up with a few remarks. Would like to then turn it over to Assemblymember Dodd, and then we're honored that Secretary Dooley is here today. And Secretary, it's good to see you, ma'am, and thank you so much for joining us in your busy schedule. Again, I just want to say thank you all for attending, and I know that many of you have taken time out of your busy schedule and traveled far and wide to be here, so thank you so much, and we are really grateful. And I also want to say thank you to all the Human Services Committee staff, along with budget sub-staff. I want to say a few thank yous to Peggy Collins, Michelle Bass, and Taryn Smith, and Kelly Burns, and Mark Teamer for all of their work that went into today's hearing. We're really grateful for your coordination on this important issue. We're going to be focused today on the closure of California's remaining developmental centers and the impact those closures will have on residents, families, and the regional center system. And as we know, California's regional center system is currently facing a funding crisis. California ranks last in the nation in funding per qualified resident with a developmental disability. And since July of 2011, 434 residential facilities, which had been focused on delivering services for the developmentally disabled, have closed, which means the system has lost a total of 2,300 beds since 2011. This is truly a defining moment for our state as major changes are made to the system of care for California's developmentally disabled residents. In the coming years, for the first time since the late 1880s, California won't be able to count on the developmental centers for providing care for some of our state's most medically fragile residents. And speaking of developmental centers, I've been honored to work with Assemblymember Dodd over the past few years with the Sonoma Developmental Center. Families and residents, staff, and local government have all come together to ensure a safe and seamless transition for the nearly 400 medically fragile residents who call the Sonoma Developmental Center home, many for decades. And I do appreciate the engagement of the administration, in particular Secretary Dooley, for her leadership. There are going to be some differences that we may have here today, and I will share with you I do have some concerns in regards to the 2018 deadline of the Sonoma Developmental Center. I believe this is an unrealistic timeline, especially if we compare previous closure timelines, which have been 5 years. The plan is currently under review by the Legislative Budget Committee and must be approved prior to implementation. According to the plan, as it's currently laid out, the Sonoma Developmental Center would be the fastest closure in our state's history. And I know we're trying to show the federal government progress, but arbitrary deadlines that are driven by dollar figures have no place in this process. And we're talking about people's lives, and that needs to be the top priority. The administration's closure plan for the Sonoma Developmental Center, for example, promises, and I quote, "Residents will not move from the SDC until appropriate services and supports identified in their individual program plan are available in the community." And what we know is that this is not the case, as it is going to take time for housing, services, and specialty programs. And not far behind the closure plan for Sonoma is Fairview and Porterville. The legislature expects to receive those plans later this year. Moreover, the Lanterman Act guarantees people with developmental disabilities the right to receive services and support, and they need to live like those without disabilities. Under the Act, California formed 21 nonprofit regional centers that coordinate services for people with developmental disabilities. And when the developmental centers close, the demand for community-based and regional center services will increase dramatically, adding pressure to a system that has been operating over the past decade with numerous budget cuts. I just want to go through those quickly. We know that we've seen rate freezes, some of which began as far back as 2003. We know that we saw an implementation of a restructured rate formula, which effectively lowered payments to some providers beginning in 2008. And number three, we saw provider payment reductions in 3 consecutive fiscal years starting in 2009 due to the historic recession. And while some of the rate reductions have been partially restored in recent years, we are nowhere near where they should be. All of these budget reductions have strained the regional centers, making it difficult to meet the demand for community services. One of the largest challenges we are facing, the difficulty of all of this, is simply recruiting and retaining staff. Folks simply can't afford to work for the low wages that are available within the system. And as we continue to close down developmental centers, we need to reinvest in the regional center system, and a deal on the managed care organization tax, which the legislature will vote on this coming Thursday, would be a good start. And we're excited that's going to be on the floor of both the Senate and the Assembly. Today's hearing is just one in a series of opportunities for the community to be able to come together to discuss the upcoming changes in the delivery of services to our developmentally disabled community. The purpose of this joint hearing is as follows. Number one, we're going to see an overview of the administration's proposed closure of the 3 remaining developmental centers, along with a status update on their closure. Number two, we're going to talk about the challenges faced and lessons learned from previous developmental center closures and how that transition has impacted residents. We're also going to hear from a variety of viewpoints on that one. We're then going to welcome an all-star panel to discuss maintaining the safety net as we face this defining moment in the way California delivers care and services to the developmentally disabled. We then want to hear from all of you, as this issue, we know, is extremely personal, and your stories and experiences are important to all of us. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to better turn it over to my right and ask Assemblymember Dodd to make a few opening comments, and would look to Senator Liu. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. I too would like to thank Secretary Dooley. While we might not agree on all the issues, I really appreciate her and her staff being engaged every step of the way, available for our calls, and of course even going out to the district and meeting several times. But I really especially want to thank Senator McGuire for convening this hearing. He has been a great partner and a tireless advocate in representing the Sonoma Developmental Center with me and advocating for people with developmental disabilities. I also want to thank Senator Mitchell for her focus on this issue. She took the time to come out with us there to tour the SDC with Senator McGuire and I, and know the residents, families, and caregivers at SDC, and we appreciate her attention to these really, really important details. I appreciate the opportunity to provide these brief opening remarks and agree with what Senator McGuire has laid out. The Senator and I have been united in our advocacy for thoughtful policy that meets the need of residents of our developmental centers and respects the input of families, the employees that care for them, and the community. It's critical that we provide the best care to our most vulnerable residents. We must ensure that if residents are being transferred out of developmental centers, that they have the comprehensive continuum of care that they need, including a state-supported backdrop in times of crisis. The last thing we want is people to be transferred and then be kicked out of their community placements with no place to go but jails or similar settings. The timeline for closure of SDC is unrealistic based on what Senator McGuire has told you today to accomplish those goals in light of this history. The state needs to invest in supporting in these communities, which means providing better reimbursement rates, but also providing medical and support services and leveraging the expertise we already have on with our existing staff. This is a process we need to get right. We need to be able to innovate, and we can't move haphazardly. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you again, Senator McGuire, for your leadership in this area.
Thank you so much, Simon, and grateful for the partnership and to be able to work with you day in and day out. So thank you for all your hard work, sir. Would like to be able to turn to Senator Liu to see if she has any opening comments, and then also to Senator Vidak, who represents the great area where Porterville is. So please.
Thank you, Chair McGuire. As a former chair of the Human Services Committee, I too am very interested in the progress we have made and learning from past practices and making sure that as we move forward, we do so in the most humane and expeditious way that we can. And I know your agenda is full, so we'll keep this short and give people an opportunity to come before us and give us the lay of the land, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. It's good to see you, and thank you for all your work in this area as well. Senator Vidak, any comments that you'd like to be able to make?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I'm going to be brief. Glad to be here. I'm here to listen and let everybody else talk.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If it works for folks, what we'd like to be able to do is move into our agenda, and that's item 2 on this afternoon's agenda, and that's an overview of the administration's proposed closure of remaining developmental centers. We're grateful that Diana Dooley, the Secretary of California Health and Human Services Agency, is here today. She's going to be joined with John Joyle, who is the Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Developmental Services. Again, they're going to provide us an overview of the administration's proposed closure of the developmental services. So please come forward if you don't mind. And then after they are done with that, Mr. Doyle will then transition into an update on where we are at with the ongoing closures as well. Secretary Dooley, thank you again for joining us, and we're grateful that you would carve out time out of your busy schedule, and you've taken so much time to be able to travel into the greater Sonoma area as well to be able to focus on this. So we welcome you for the overview.
Great. Thanks very much, Senator, and I appreciate you letting me sub in today. You're getting kind of the second string. Mike Wilkenine, the Undersecretary and Acting Director of the Department, was scheduled to be here, but as you know, we're all working around the clock to answer all the questions and be ready to move forward on the Managed Care Organization tax reform package, and so we're tag teaming a little bit today. But as you know, and as you said, the programs at the Department of Developmental Services have been very important to me personally. There are many programs in this agency, but these programs have been particularly important. As you know, I worked for Governor Brown when there was Brown 1.0 and had the very good fortune and privilege of knowing Frank Lannerman. Uncle Frank was very committed to this population, and the challenges and opportunities that we face now with the closure of the 3 remaining developmental centers, I think was a dream that he had that he never expected to see realized. And since then, we've of course had the adoption of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the subsequent federal court action in Olmstead that has compelled us further on the path to reducing institutional care and encouraging and providing support for people to live in what the court called the least restrictive environment possible. And so all of that leads to where we are today as we move on this final leg of a very long journey of nearly 50 years of moving away from institutional care, and not only for the developmentally disabled, but for the mentally ill and for many others who live. You just enacted last year continuum of care reform in the foster care program, again to move away from group homes. So in very many ways, we are moving on several fronts to help people live in the least restrictive environment, clearly putting patient safety and support services at the heart of that. And as you said, Senator McGuire, and as I have repeated in all of the task force meetings and the community meetings and the meetings here in Sacramento, there are 3 communities of interest, particularly at Sonoma, but in all of these closures, and the residents are at the heart of it. The people that are being served are the first priority. The staff that serves them are the second priority, and the use of the facilities, and in the case of Sonoma Developmental Center, the beautiful land that is there and the issues related to that land resource are in the outer ring of that circle of our target. But always at the center of the bullseye is the care and support and needs of the people who live there. We started on this path my path 5 years ago, and that path was, or the pace of that movement was accelerated significantly last year with the decision by the federal government on the funding of the care. It's a shared funding between the state and the federal government for the care of the people in the developmental centers. And they have been moving very much more quickly than we were toward that ultimate condition that would be beyond the need for institutional care with the removal of federal funding. We were able to negotiate an agreement with them that would extend their share of the funding at Sonoma for a limited period of time. The maximum that they were willing to consider was 2 years, and that was contingent upon a review that we are in the process of this spring. If we pass that hurdle, we'll get 1 more year in our budget year. So our budget conversations this year will go along with our communications with the federal government about their share of funding for the 16-17 budget year. If we're successful there, it would, by their conditions, end in July of 2017. We were able to get an agreement that post-election there will be a reopener, that we will be able to discuss our progress with them again at the end of this calendar year with the hope that they may reconsider and give us a little more year. But if we get all that they have said is even possible in their shared funding, that federal funding would still end before our targeted closure of December of 2018. So while the closure plan at Sonoma is shorter than it was in the previous closures, we've also learned a great deal about the closure process from our previous experiences, and I think that is what you're hearing today will help illustrate both from our staff and the technical responses to the progress that we're making, as well as from the community. Certainly the commitment that we've had to also respond to a federal decision with regard to the structure of our managed care organization tax that had been in place since 2009, and our very cooperative and collaborative work with the community, as well as with our co-equal partners in the legislature to come up with a balanced tax reform package that will allow us to avoid $1 billion+ deficit that would result if we are not able to replace that, and the commitment that we have all made to the developmental disabilities community to have a first call on the restoration of that funding, which we hope to finalize certainly as soon as possible and hopefully this week. But we've been working on it a long time, so we'll take whatever time we need to get where we need to be, but failure isn't an option. So all of that is putting in place the opportunity to move thoughtfully and appropriately with the ultimate closure of these remaining developmental centers, which, as I said, has been really the goal of a 50-year policy to moving to the least restrictive care possible for this population. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and provide that broad perspective as an overview. John Doyle, the Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Developmental Services, is prepared to answer the questions that you provided, which we appreciate. And I meant to say at the outset that I was very glad to see my friend Senator Vidak. As Valley residents, we go a long way back, and our paths have crossed many ways over the years, and I appreciate his commitment as I have as well to Porterville. Porterville, of course, represents each one of these developmental centers has its own set of circumstances, but Porterville is particularly unique in that we have a secure treatment area at Porterville that will remain after the closure, and we're working with our colleagues in the third co-equal branch of government called the courts about our need to provide services for restoration of of competency, which is part of our program at Porterville and will continue to be. So I am happy to answer any high-level questions. If you won't go very deep before you'll get beyond my competence, but I appreciate the opportunity to make opening comments and to thank you for your committed leadership and continued engagement in this journey that we've been on for a very long time.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary, and great.
I will also apologize that I won't be able to stay for the whole hearing. I do follow the hearings, and I get, I certainly know the concerns that are expressed to you, but I don't want to show disrespect to the community that's here. I wanted to say for the record that John and the team will answer your specific questions and report back to me anything that I need to engage on personally.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. I have some very specific questions. Maybe I can hold them for Mr. Doyle, but I wanted to see and welcome our co-chair of today's hearing, Senator Mitchell. It's good to see you. I know we were mentioning that you were at the Budget Committee along with Mr. Monty. We're really grateful. Our Majority Leader who is here, thank you so much. And wanted to be able to see from the committee if there are any questions that you may have of the Secretary. Otherwise, we'll go to Mr. Doyle to be able to complete the presentation on item number 2. Why don't we go to Mr. Doyle, please?
Perfect. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. John Doyle, Developmental Services. Before I begin my prepared remarks, I wanted to just comment on the issue of the closure of the developmental centers. I know there are, oftentimes we hear that it's a monetary issue, that this is about funding. I think while funding is an important part of any governmental decision, this also is, I think, a shift in philosophy. The federal government and the state of California agree that people can live independently in the community, that services that are provided in the developmental centers can be provided as well in the community. So I think it's important to note that this is an important part of this discussion. To begin, California is committed to serving individuals with developmental disabilities in the least restrictive environment appropriate for their needs. And we're successfully developing alternatives in the community for people to achieve that goal. Over the last 50 years, as the community system has developed and matured under the principles and values of the Lanterman Act, California's dependence on institutional care has diminished. Additionally, the trailer bill to the 2012-13 budget imposed a moratorium on most admissions to developmental centers. Large developmental centers are no longer sustainable given their continuing decline in populations and their high costs of operation and maintenance. Additionally, it's difficult for developmental centers to attract, recruit, and retain highly qualified employees who are required to serve the complex and specialized needs of the remaining residents. Pending decertification actions by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services at the remaining developmental centers and the potential loss of federal Medicaid funding has contributed to the need to close the 3 remaining developmental centers concurrently. Residential intermediate care facility units at the 3 remaining developmental centers have been decertified by CMS based on the failure to meet federal standards. The state negotiated a settlement agreement with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services at Sonoma Developmental Center to continue federal funding for individuals living on, for 161 individuals who are living on ICF units at Sonoma. The agreement is based on California's decision to close Sonoma and transition its residents to other appropriate alternative settings. Similar settlement agreements are pending for Fairview and the general treatment area at Porterville Developmental Center. Consistent with the settlement agreement, and as was mentioned earlier, the plan to close Sonoma identifies a target date of December 2018. The closure plan for Fairview and Porterville are planning closure dates before, sometime around December of 2021. The department is working with the regional centers involved in these closures to achieve these dates. However, our primary concern is the health and well-being of each resident, and we will ensure that individuals will not move from a developmental center into the community until the appropriate supports are available. In 2013, Secretary Dooley established the Task Force on the Future of Developmental Centers. The task force was charged with developing a master plan for the future of the developmental centers that addresses the service needs of all developmental center residents and ensures the delivery of cost-effective, integrated quality services. DDS is addressing the recommendations of the task force, including the issue of a placement of last resort or a safety net as the appropriate role of the state for when community service providers are unable, unwilling, or unavailable to support individuals with significant challenges in a stable environment. DDS's first priority is to develop new models of care in the community to fill service gaps for persons with significantly challenging behaviors, including those recommended by the Developmental Services Task Force, especially the need for enhanced behavioral support homes, which provide care to individuals with challenging behaviors, community crisis homes, which are short-term homes for individuals who typically are in a mental health crisis in the community and need to be stabilized. And then we've also developed and put online delayed egress secure perimeter homes, which ensure that individuals with elopement issues are secure in these homes. As these homes come online, we will gain greater insight into what additional services are needed and what modifications we need to make within these homes to better serve the population that reside in them. Concurrently, we have begun the process of researching and analyzing the population of individuals for whom the safety net may require more direct state involvement, perhaps on a short-term basis, but until capacity can be developed in the community. In addition to residential services, the department is working to achieve increased access to managed care and dental services, as well as maintain specialty services that are currently provided by developmental centers until those services are available in the community. We're also working closely with regional centers to develop all services needed to support individuals transitioning into the community, and we're providing funding through our community placement plan to develop the resources that are needed in the community, not only housing, but programs, mental health support, dentistry, things like that. So we work through our community placement plan to develop those resources. And as I mentioned, residents will not be moving from the developmental center until appropriate placements are found in the community. And an essential component of any developmental center closure is a commitment to community resource development, which evolves throughout the closure process. With the closing of the remaining developmental centers, we recognize the critical timing of preserving certain developmental center assets and services until we are sure community capacity exists. This is an ongoing focus for the department and the regional centers as closures proceed. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. I appreciate that. I know I have several questions, but I wanted to be able to turn to the committee before I go into it. Would like to be able to look to our co-chair, Senator Mitchell, and again, thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful for all of your work, along with your team's work, to be able to get today's oversight hearing organized. So thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate you extending the invitation to have Budget Sub 3 join with you in today's conversation. Because this is indeed a defining moment, as the agenda would suggest, in terms of the health and future of a good number of California residents, as well as the department, in terms of making sure that we do this well and in the best interests of the residents of the centers that are proposed to be closed. I'm clear as a sitting member of the Senate, my role and our collective role with regard to oversight and approval and support, from my perspective, fiscal support, and making sure that there are appropriate resources to make sure that this is managed in a healthy and safe way. With that, one quick question I had, of course, in preparation for today's hearing, we've met with a number of various interest groups, one of whom, a group that you have worked closely with, and that's, the parent and family members of residents. And they talked about meetings that your department has committed to making sure that there's facilitation and a process by which issues can continue to be worked on, specifically the ongoing concern around state staffing. And we know why that's important in terms of continuity of care. This notion that the county is interested in developing a health center, on site, just all of these kind of various issues that are still kind of up in play. I wanted to make sure that the meetings are going to take place, that your commitment to bringing in an outside facilitator, which I think is a real smart thing to do, is going to happen. Can you give me a sense of the schedule and how many meetings you envision, just so I have a sense that they are indeed happening?
And Senator, we don't have a schedule defined yet. We have heard from the Sonoma Parent Hospital Association, and they're also representing the Sonoma Developmental Center Coalition, and have asked about sitting down to have these meetings to discuss the topics you've just mentioned. And the department is willing to move forward with those meetings. We understand that there are a number of issues. As the Secretary mentioned, we have the issue of residents, we have the issue of employees, and we have the issue of the land. And we think that we're agreeable to starting those meetings. It's just a matter of timing. We haven't picked a date yet to do that, but we do look forward to those discussions because there are, I think, a lot of things that there's a lot of detail to go through in working some of these things out.
Right.
But we are committed to having those meetings. And unfortunately, I can't give you a timeline just yet. But.
Do you have a sense, in a previous life when I ran an agency, and I would ask these questions, I'd have one of my C-suite members who would respond in seasons. And so she would say, well, winter or spring. So can you give me a sense of whether you will at least have begun the meetings before we end the budget subcommittee process?
Yes, that's our hope, that we would start before that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all for now. I'll have some additional as we continue on.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Monning, it's good to see you, sir, and welcome.
Yes, thank you, co-chairs, for organizing this and joint committees. I want to thank the Deputy Director for your work and being here today. And you referenced in the development of the community placement plan for each resident. I know that looks at available community resources. You also talked about protecting some of the specialized services, and I'm just curious, in a tour of Sonoma Developmental Center, some amazing resources for shoes, for bed shaping, for dental services, much of that which I don't imagine is duplicated in local communities. Is there any thought of keeping those facilities operational, but to serve residents as they move into a residential living situation?
Yes, Senator, those services will be provided at Sonoma, and the services you mentioned, orthotics, durable equipment maintenance, things like that, those services will continue to be provided while the center is open. And in the meantime, we're looking into how to replicate those services in the community.
And so on that point, you clearly, it sounds transitional in nature. Is there a scenario by which it would prove to be most cost effective to maintain some of those centralized skills and services at Sonoma to be made available to residents who had been placed in community housing?
Yeah, one of the major problems we have with the facility at Sonoma, and it's not unique to Sonoma, the other facilities are aging as well, but Sonoma is the oldest remaining open center. The infrastructure is in quite a state of disrepair. It's everything. It's water, sewer, storm drains, power, electrical and gas. Those things are all, they all need repair. And so we're working on doing an assessment, a more current assessment of the state of the property, and would need to better understand what the possibilities are. But at this point, we think it would take a significant investment to retain or to repair the existing infrastructure.
Well, that's helpful for me. And again, infrastructure is one issue. I think the other valuable resource are the employees there who have developed these skills, and even to the point of knowing some of the individual residents and their unique needs. So while infrastructure may not make sense to try to continue with it being centralized there, would one of the options that you look at be making sure those skilled employees are able to continue to provide those services even if they weren't continued to be located there?
Yes, one of the issues that we are looking at, and I will go into further detail as I continue my testimony, but one of the issues we're looking at is improving the state staff in the community program. The program worked well when we closed Ag News. It did not work as well when we closed Lanterman. And so we want to be thorough in assessing where we had problems and what kinds of things we can do to ensure that state staff who are interested are able to transition into community employment.
Thank you, and I think I know there is further testimony, so I'll hold further questions till we hear more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. I think we had an add-on by the co-chair, and we'll go to Senator Liu.
Thank you. I agree with everything Senator Monning said. These are issues that we've discussed pretty consistently over the last several years in Sub-3, and I completely agree with you, and do hope that we are able to have an objective, really kind of fact-based analysis of what went well, what didn't, because this isn't our first time to the rodeo. We've had some other closures, although this is a unique, each experience is unique, I get that. April 7th is the date that Sub-3 will have this on our agenda, and so I'll try not today to drill down too deeply into fiscal issues. But the reality of a physical plant that kind of went into commission in 1888 is looming. And I agree with your opening statement in terms of the philosophical and culture shift around what is appropriate and what is humane in terms of nurturing safe, care and living surroundings. Are you at liberty today to share with us at all if there are any, if we are currently at any additional risk around loss of federal dollars because of units not being identified as within code, for the lack of a better term, from the feds?
Well, as you're aware, we have, and as the Secretary described, we have the existing agreement at Sonoma Developmental Center. We are working with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to develop similar agreements for both Fairview and Porterville. And our hope is that we will have those agreements in place soon. The discussions seem to be moving well, but as with anything, until it's a done deal, it's hard to say for sure, but we're very hopeful that things are moving in the right direction.
And what about specifically with regard to Sonoma and any recent California Department of Public Health declaration of immediate jeopardy.
Yes, ma'am.
At Sonoma.
Yes.
Does that specific incident put us at risk at all?
And I will get into more detail regarding that specific incident, but we don't know for certain until we receive the final evaluation regarding the current survey. We won't know, but we haven't been told at this point that that incident will create a problem.
Okay, and I just ask again because it creates this really delicate balance that while in your opening statement you say that, and I agree with you, that the ultimate decision to close is not fiscally based, it's culture based and new theory based. But the reality is the state of California as a whole is experiencing a major, we're at risk, a major financial risk by continuing this institution given its age. And it's this notion of, do we continue to invest in the physical plant when there is a closure date, as opposed to taking those dollars, which is often raised in sub-3 by members, and shoring up and making sure that the community facilities and services are there and available. So there's this real balancing act that I think we face as policymakers, and really wanting to make the right decision. So I look forward to hearing, and hopefully, if not today, certainly by our April 7th hearing, about what our expectation is around last Thursday's incident in Sonoma, which was a very troubling one, I must say.
Thank you so much, Senator. Any other questions before Mr. Doyle continues on his presentation? All right, Mr. Doyle is going to be moving into the current status of developmental centers and is going to provide us an update about where we're at and where we are going with the closures. I'll then ask my questions after that. Mr. Doyle, the floor is yours.